Welcome back to Lambda Bible Studies, and welcome back to the Fireside Chat. Here we gather once more, gentlemen of leisure, to chill out for an evening, have a good time, and put the world to rights in what I think is widely acknowledged to be the most prestigious and exciting live stream currently going out on the internet. And who better to share a late night discussion with than Prudentialist and Pharaoh, and I think British Berean will be ambling over, presumably with a cup of I don't know, coffee, tea. What do gentlemen drink? Prude, what's your drink of choice? Oh, perhaps a whiskey is the right thing. Is that on
I
brand?
I suppose so. I used to be quite the whiskey drinker, although for me these days it's black tea or coffee.
Oh, black tea. That's got some good. That's got some good manly vibes about it. Pharaoh, what would you be drinking in a late
Well,
evening?
well, the true hipster choice right now is the Negroni. As you know, like that's having a big comeback, pioneered by Mark from IM 1776. He's forming some kind of Negroni comeback meme basically, and I see it everywhere. So if you want to be cool, you know what I've been drinking a lot recently, Luke, and that is espressos. Because it's really
It's like because you're such a fan of Sabrina Carpenter.
No, it's because I live in Essex now, and there's nothing better than just poncing around in Essex and just like being just like really like annoyingly hipster, and everyone else just having like their kind of nice tall Americanos or lattes or whatever. All the yummy mummies. AA comes in, gets his flat white, and there's me with just taking little sips from a tiny cup, a tall glass of iced water next to me, talking about tones of lychee in the coffee. That's what you need to do.
Really, I think of espresso as the most Italian coffee, like the pure blood Italians who will only eat a margarita pizza and drink only espresso.
Well, one confusing thing is that if you ask for a latte, they'll just make you an Americano with milk, because it's just like latte is milk, which was fine, but it was really, really confusing at the time. I was like, oh, this coffee is way stronger than I thought. And then, yeah, like you said, everyone's just drinking espresso all the time. I mean, I would say, like, flavor-wise, it's definitely a different experience. But I love milk. I'm a milky man. I drink like at least 1 or 2 pints a day, almost. I'm not even kidding.
That's what the skinny teenagers do to try and put on muscle, isn't it? Drink pints of milk. Mm-hmm. Now, it is, I believe, it's widely known that we are in Pride Month at the moment. Have you heard this? Which I take to be a useful, I'm glad that they put this on the calendar as a moment to reflect on pride as a concept. So I think in honor of Pride Month, I'm just going to take a moment just to bring before us a few thoughts on the topic of pride. Isaiah 2:12, the Lord Almighty has a day in store for all the proud and lofty. They will be humbled. James 4 verse 6, but he gives us more grace. That is why Scripture says, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Let me see if I've got any others here. To fear the Lord is to hate evil. I hate pride and arrogance, evil behavior, and perverse speech. So I'm grateful for the society-wide celebration of humility and the reminder of the lingering sin of pride that lives within all of us. I don't know if you two had the opportunity to ponder pride over the last few weeks.
I have had the pleasure of not living near any public celebrations of pride. I always think of the first verse in chapter 10 of the Wisdom of Sirach, that the beginning of a man's pride is to depart from the Lord, for his heart has forsaken his master. And I think that that's very fitting for all of these processions, that we are departing from the Lord. Watch us walk down the street as we go further and further away from him. But no, unfortunately, because of uh, a new law that the Biden administration signed into law, the 19th, or so this last Wednesday, was a federal holiday for me. I work in government, so I had it off for Juneteenth, which was again another one of those political holidays, or polidays, as Stephen Carson's wife likes to call them. I'm a big fan of the term. And so, yeah, another political holiday off, a very sodomized liturgical calendar here in the United States and other parts of the West. It's truly an insult to churches everywhere.
I just looked it up. Juneteenth is about the ending of slavery. Is that right?
It started in Galveston because the general that was in charge of, I guess, occupying forces had read out the Emancipation Proclamation in June of 1865, and it's sort of just been latched on to as this greater, you know, race political holiday. I find it strange that we made a federal holiday to celebrate the largest black layoff ever, but what can you do?
That's a pretty funny take. I haven't heard that one. I mean,
You immediately tweet that out before Luke steals it. You know, he's
Oh,
eyeing up.
I did on
race to
Wednesday.
Twitter.
I like
Oh,
using
nice.
that. It's a good joke.
No, that's good.
I was having a discussion about the bit in Ephesians that's talking about slaves and masters recently, and I was very faintly floating the fact that employment and slavery are not a million miles different from one another, but you can choose how strongly to assert that that concept.
All of the people working under Luke right now, you know, they're feeling the master's whip every day. You may be employees, but in my eyes, you're my servants and slaves.
This is perpetuating the exact confusion that I think we need to dispel. That the way that you're treated by the people who are over you, the like cruelty of it, is orthogonal to whether or not you are a slave.
Okay, I want to talk about the slavery chat because that's a good topic. But can I do my take on the pride thing quickly? And then
yeah. Oh yes, please.
Slavery.
I'm happy to leave the slave chat. By the way,
no, we're definitely doing slave chat again. This is going to get you in a lot of trouble. This is great. Pride. I want to have a controversial take, and that is, well, okay, I'm not necessarily anti all forms of pride, and here's the thing. I wonder whether it's a translation thing where, again, just the English language doesn't necessarily give us the full translation or depth of meaning across the word. So, for example, I was thinking, what about the baptism of Jesus, where they hear God's voice and it's like, this is my son? Is that is that not an element of, like,
with whom I am well pleased?
With Hill, I'm well pleased, and I think, and I'll give you some other examples of similar cases. The craftsman creating something beautiful, the artist finishing a work. You look upon it and you're like, I'm well pleased with this work. Even like children, for example, you know, my daughter will come up to me and you know, she just drops an absolute banging prayer at the end of the day, just out of nowhere. It's like, nice, good job. So I wonder, I feel like, because I feel like in like the 16th century they would say something like vaingloriousness or something else. What we mean by those kind of negative versions of pride is it's a kind of a form of arrogance and usurpation of God as the source of all goodness, if that makes sense. While I think we need to have room to be able to say, to celebrate good things in the context of if you create something beautiful, you can say, I think this is a nice work and worthy, or even dare I say a masterpiece, for example, and say, but that's it within the context of God's realm and him creating everything and turning it back to him, if that makes sense. So I think I'm actually pro certain forms of pride, and I feel like we need to get more nuance on the word.
Okay, can we think also of some situations which you would be against pride? Like if somebody has a proud character, and therefore they are not prepared to admit that they're wrong about things, or consider other people might have a good argument, something like that.
I think the kind of the so-called negative pride is I almost see it as like a maybe I shouldn't use negative pride. The bad form of pride that I'm thinking of should be seen in the context of a negative humility. That's how I see it. So this idea of approaching life in a simple and a contemplative, reflective way, and to be kind of respectful of other people and their knowledge. Like the proud man listens to himself and not the wise man, for example, because he hasn't got the humility to understand his place or to know his limits. It's kind of like there's something weirdly Promethean about it as well. I feel like it's or maybe Faustian would be better, where it's the desire for unlimited, but believing in yourself in an unlimited way. Well, I think, for example, going back to that craftsman example, flipping it over, any good craftsman, I think, has humility baked in, because firstly, you look upon the works of your betters and the masters, and you're just like instantly humbled. But then you try and achieve what they have tried to achieve. That's much of art history is looking upon our betters, despairing, and then trying to reach to their lofty heights at the same time.
I guess the way I think of it is that you have your actual virtues and abilities, and then your opinion of yourself. And if your opinion of yourself is too high, that's pride. And there's an equal error in the opposite direction, where your actual opinion of yourself is too low. And I don't think we should be striving for that, if that's what people mean by humility. I think there's just a natural, in the human heart, there's a natural impulse towards thinking too highly of yourself. So a humble person, in opposition to a proud person, accurately understands their own competencies.
Well, I think also to consider, you mentioned translation. I know that there are two particular words in the New Testament in Greek for pride. The one I think we see the most is, if I remember even how on earth to pronounce it, would be huperephania, which is its rough translation is arrogance, haughtiness, someone who's got a belief that they are better than those around them. So, for instance, you see that in Mark chapter 7. From within, out of the hearts of men proceed evil thoughts. All these things are evil within, defile man. This includes, pride, foolishness, blasphemy, deceit, wickedness. I think that's an excellent way to maybe consider it. The other one is a word like, I think it's called just tufo, which means to just make blind or to make yourself appear that you are greater than others when you're really not. So a form of hypocrisy or showmanship. Whereas I think that, throughout the Old Testament and even in the New, you see numerous references to like craftsmanship, that you are supposed to be diligent in your work and to be mindful not to screw it up, especially even if you're a teacher, right? Like James 3, especially, your teachers are judged more harshly. And I think Proverbs, as well as the Wisdom of Sirach, you have the emphasis of being diligent and ensuring that your work is the best that you can make it. So I think that it's a good line to draw. Like, we should be proud of good things that we do, as long as that those labors are oriented towards what is right, rather than thinking, "Oh, I'm hot stuff. I'm the best of the best."
There's something, there's something interesting. I wonder whether also the good version has more externality to it. So again, pride in a child, pride in the work. It's sort of outside of yourself, if that makes sense, as opposed to, I know everything we've talked about in the negative sense seems to be focused on the internal. Luke, I've just sent across a link as well. Whenever you look up words, it's always worth having a pop at Johnson's dictionary. So this is Dr. Johnson, the sort of inventor of the dictionary, just because...
The original.
Well, it's just funny just to see how kind of like words have changed. And I think you should do dramatic readings of 1 to 8 of the 8 different meanings here. You don't have to give all the examples, but I think it'd be quite funny.
Okay, I'm just going to bring them up on the screen so everyone can see. Present. Oh, by the way, Holocron Record, while I'm sharing this, has super chatted for $20 and says he can't watch this live, but he's been very much enjoying these streams, from which we learn Holocron Record is a man of extraordinary taste. And yes, well, the stream will be waiting for you when you're available, Holocron Record, and you can watch this moment back and count the seconds and find how many dollars per second my voice is worth. So how much? So this middle column, right? And then
just read,
including the little text.
No,
just the big text.
Just do the headers. I think it's quite good.
Yeah. Okay. So meaning one of pride. Inordinate and unreasonable self-esteem.
I quite like that.
Off to a good start, yeah.
Yeah, the unreasonability of it. You're almost sort of lost in a world of your own, which I think is quite a good.
I love that his quotes are Shakespeare and Milton.
Milton, yeah, absolutely, so based, unbelievably based.
Definition 2: insolence, rude treatment of others, insolent exultation. The example being that which hath wrought this hellish mischief unawares, that hardly we escaped the pride of France. I love that Shakespeare used the French as or I suppose Johnson used the French as a classic example of rude insolence.
Well, that's it. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Number 3: dignity of manner, loftiness of air. He's quite good, Johnson, isn't he? Like he's capturing something.
This is what I'm saying. But it's because I think it's just such an interesting word, because again, it's just got all of this kind of layers of meaning, and I think these are all true, and I see it all connected together. Yeah. But it's kind of like one of them by themselves wouldn't necessarily you would just describe as prideful there.
So what about this one? Generous elation of heart.
Yes, well, I think this is where stuff gets lost in time, doesn't it?
The honest pride of conscious virtue.
Well, maybe that's the kind of like more positive version.
Yeah,
I'm referring to. So it's interesting how
he starts with the negative ones, but then moves on to so like elevation, dignity, pride of place. Of course, if you put something on your mantelpiece in the middle, pride of place. Ornament, show, decoration. Summer's pride hath far too short a leash, whose ivory sheath inwrought with curious pride adds graceful terror to the wearer's side. Pope. splendor, ostentation, and lastly, apparently, the state of a female beast soliciting the male. Is that why they call it a pride of lions? Because it's all the women kind of
maybe
running the
that's it.
show.
Makes sense.
Interesting. Because he doesn't mention the collective noun, does Johnson. But didn't somebody recently claim that it might have even been you, Pharaoh? It seems like the sort of thing you would say. It's that the collective nouns were all invented in like the last 100 years. That they were
No,
all
I
just. You didn't say that.
No, but that does exactly sound the kind of thing I would say. I think it probably is all made up, isn't it? Basically.
Well, the thing that I'm curious about is, I remember somebody saying to me once in church, all pride is wrong. You shouldn't be proud of anything. Exactly. And I was like, well, what about proud of your children? Shouldn't we? And he was like, no, you shouldn't be proud of your children. And I usually quite like these sort of shocking statements where somebody says something unexpected. So it's stuck with me, and I've never quite got to the bottom of it. I think there is sometimes cases where parents will carve out for themselves a special exception. It's like a behavior that would definitely be wrong if you were doing it with regards to yourself somehow becomes a virtue when you do it with regards to your children. So I'm also open to that possibility. So
is this your childhood, Luke? Come on, then. Let's say this. There's obviously a story behind this.
No, I wasn't thinking of myself as in relation here, but the kind of for example, if you in a Christian context, you might discuss that you should have no idols, like nothing that you worship, nothing is more important than God. But I think that is rarely applied to parents with regards to their children. I think it's often viewed that, but this is for my children, and therefore it is actually number one priority. Do you know what I mean?
I wonder in that context, though, it's kind of like part of the parenting role is to protect, nurture, and grow the child. And a consequence of that is you have to spend a lot of time with them. You have to place them above yourself and other things. So it's sort of part of the job, if that makes sense, to prioritize them. Now, obviously, where you get off is, I don't know. I'm trying to think. I don't think I've ever seen anyone really idolize their children before.
Really?
Maybe. Well, no. Well, maybe you get it with like, I don't know, like you see kind of like whatever the Chinese family memes of like my child is like a doctor or something like that. You know, that kind of thing. Maybe, I don't know. Go on then. You sound like
I think that I'd argue that it's one of the biggest temptations for a large percentage of parents. I think I say it completely the opposite way, that it's so common that you don't notice it, but it's actually, I suppose the way to measure it would be like, if somebody said something against God, how full-bodied and emotional would the person be in their response, versus if somebody said something against their children, you know? Like,
I mean, basically, I would agree with them if they said something negative to my children. I'm just joking. I'm just messing
around. Yeah, well, interesting. And maybe it is just a boring linguistic discussion, but I think there's something really worth pondering in this.
Bring back
this term,
pride. Positive pride. I'm proud. I'm proud and
proud feet.
Exactly, proud feet.
But should we not? So, for example, you said externalize it, like bring it outside of the self. If you see a beautiful piece of art and you made it, I've heard it said that you should not view that piece of art with any greater regard than you would for something somebody else made.
Lame.
Is that something we should aspire to?
No, you should definitely. And also, I think that. I mean, there's obviously a trait for great artists to be absolute snobs and the worst kind of self-publicist at the same time. But I mean, I have a very different philosophy regarding like art and craft, where I sort of mentioned this with Nathan Hood a little while ago. This idea of you know Plato's original or some of his thoughts about divinity, this idea of the truth, the true, the beautiful, and the good, and unified together. And I feel like what we do at church is to find out the truth of things or to explore that. But something that's really important that a lot of people miss out, and again, I think certainly the more puritanical elements of Christianity definitely do, is exploring beauty as a form of understanding God. So in the same way that you read witness statements and the Word of God themselves to understand the nature of God or the face of God. This is again I'm banging out the controversial opinions. Is there an argument to say that through the study of beauty, you can understand God as well as through the truth of the Bible?
Prude, what do you think?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I think that, for instance, with the artist, I think it's always it always just depends on the artist's temperament. There were quite a few. I don't know which Renaissance artist or sculptor had said it when he had died, that he had apologized for dying because he, had left behind such shoddy work that he couldn't work on anymore or perfect. But
This is
I
Leonardo.
thank you. That was going to bother the tar out of me, so thank you. But so I guess it depends on what you are creating in that respect. I think having parental pride in your children, I agree with Luke. I think that happens way more often than people realize. I think it's also a cultural thing. I know that there are a lot of Jewish families that are super proud of their like doctor or lawyer sons, and elevate them because they can use that as nagging points on their in-laws or their other families or aunts or brothers. Like, hey, my son's a doctor. How's how's Benjamin doing or something like that. Same thing with sort of the tiger parent. We make these things stereotypes because there's an ounce of truth to them. And so I think that pride in parenthood, but I think that there is that wish fulfillment that you want your children to be the things that you couldn't, or things that you want to improve upon yourself, which I think is also can have dangerous implications. But as for maybe the extremes or the externalities of pride, I think that it is very quick to fall into a sense of prelest or spiritual self-delusion, that we can elevate ourselves higher than we probably should, and depending on what we do, whether it's spiritually or in physical tasks. Because one of the things that my teacher has always told me is that she remembers when she was a little girl, she had someone had her father complimented her saying, "You're a very beautiful girl," and she says, "Well, I know," and he says, "You're not supposed to say that." Because there will always be people who are less beautiful than you, but there will always be someone more beautiful than you. And it was humbling for her, and I think that that's something to consider. So we may create a great work of art, but then we might go to a gallery or something and find someone doing a very similar style or painting or portrait that's just blows us out of the water. And I think that that can happen on a physical or spiritual level.
British Berean, welcome to the stream.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Ferry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say you didn't seem convinced with my my little argument. Here's what I want to say, right? Just quickly before you say anything. Like, I want to say this is maybe outside of the fundamental truth of Christ as the deliverer and savior of souls.
Yeah.
But like, what about? Sorry, 1 second.
While Pharaoh's gone, I will remind everybody of the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies speak of his handiwork. So God as an artist reveals himself to us through his aesthetic creations, almost as a first form of revelation. I don't know if that's the direction Pharaoh was going.
Sorry, a couple of angles you could take on it. Firstly, is again Plato's aesthetics were based on the idea of imitation. So he would say that all of nature that's been created is, a beautiful creation by the hand of God. So if we can imitate nature itself, we are understanding and imitating God. That's his fundamental. That's his fundamental. So that's this is what I'm saying is like reflecting on a cloud or a tree will let you understand that.
Does
So
this
I'm a bit late
argue?
to this conversation, obviously, but we're talking about beauty, right, in its relation to things like truth and goodness. Is that right, or have I missed the tone?
The starting point, that's on point. The starting point was discussion of pride, this being Pride Month after all, and is it ever right to be proud of something? And yes, and then Pharaoh, as a tangent to that, is making an argument that an artist who does good work, is this right, Pharaoh, can reveal to us God.
Yeah, exactly. Or okay, here's a second example I was thinking of, and that was in the. A lame way of saying it would be to bring stories to life. So, for example, you can read something, you can hear something, but when you've seen it depicted by a great artist, it connects with you in a bigger way. So, for example, I always love Titian's Noli Me Tangere. The moment of Mary in the garden after the resurrection, where he basically says, "Don't touch me," which I always interpreted as a way of sort of protecting her faith, if that makes sense. Like how Thomas had to touch his wounds to believe. She was the only one that turned up. It was purely by faith, and I've always interpreted it as this moment of Jesus trying to kind of preserve. Like I've heard it argued about, it's about like the connection between the new bodies, but it doesn't make any sense because Thomas touches the body later. I think it's about him preserving her faith. Yeah, are you gonna bring up the picture?
I was trying to find it. Is it Titan or Tizia? I don't know. Copy image address. Is this the one?
No.
Okay, I haven't been able to find it then.
Hold on, I'm getting it now. But
give me a link.
I saw this, and it's changed the understanding of that passage for me, and made me connect with that. Do you know how you can again, like this is what we're doing now is a bit lame, because seeing art digitally, I think, is just a really bad experience. Partly because you're missing out on all of the tones and the depth of the medium, etc., and the size of the work.
Shall I see if I can borrow the original Titian for the weekend retreat?
It would be good, yeah, to reflect. Yeah, we can just see if we can get it out on loan. So
you might even get some additional retreat members in the Just Stop Oil gang. They might come along.
That's true. Oh dear! Oh my goodness! Yeah, it's just, look, guys. It's just paint, isn't it? Really, So that's my second. That's my second argument, is that you can quote enhance the experience of text alone through beauty.
Is this related to the original conversation about pride, or is this a separate? Are you saying that taking pride in your work is important for this reason?
No, this is another tangent.
This is just completely irrelevant. Okay, fine. I just wanted to know whether I needed to like see it in the context of pride, but that's a distraction. I think I agree with you, and I think it's something that I'm coming more and more to see. Like I probably would have, if you'd caught me 10 years ago, I would have been extremely focused on logical arguments and inferences and ABC. You know, everything's about little syllogisms and so on. And I guess I'm understanding life in a much more complex, technicolor, expressional, relational way these days. So I'm quite I'm quite up. I was thinking the other day, because I think Distributist was doing his stream and was kind of proposing policies. Like if you were in charge and had a lot of power, what would you actually do with it? And I found myself reflecting that I actually think I would create very generous schemes to support, to kind of patronize the arts. I would actually put a substantial amount of the economy into art. So hopefully that warms the cockles of your hearts, Pharaoh.
Like I said, don't you remember that was stream we did ages ago? I want 10% of the national GDP spent on glorifying God's name through works of art, basically.
Through works of art. Wow.
I think one of the problems with art endowments, even if you were suddenly a monarch, Luke, and you disbanded Parliament and you're pumping all this money into the arts, is that in order to produce works that are as good as the one that we're witnessing before us, you actually have to have a widespread set of cultural touchstones in order for the art to be effective. I mean, as Pharaoh was saying earlier, the art can really enhance the meaning of a passage. The problem is if no one knows the passage, then the art is simply talking about something that's meaningless to everyone in the society. So it doesn't it doesn't land, or it could be the most beautiful piece of art and just no one would care about it, which is very sad.
So the monkey paw version of this story is that I become the benevolent dictator and I pour all the money into the arts, and then they're just producing an endless stream of nihilistic, horrific.
Yeah, I mean, which could be true, which could be like truthful in a certain way. I mean that I have quite an appreciation for the painter Francis Bacon. One of the reasons I like his works, even though they could be described as hideous in many ways, is because they reveal a certain truth about the spiritual state of the West in the 20th century that I don't think a work like the one we're looking at now could do. Yeah, so that's probably one of his most famous ones of Innocent the Tenth, and it's actually based on like an earlier painting by another artist. I think it's Velázquez maybe. But it's really striking because like whatever Bacon's personal interpretation was, it's immediately recognizable as the sort of dying, screaming face of a strong religion and strong religious figure. And there's something true about that, even if it's not beautiful in a conventional sense. So maybe if you patronize, the problem is if you patronize the arts, the number of painters who would be of as high a quality as this is quite low. So you'd probably have to improve the actual technical abilities of the artist before you started seeing results in terms of
it might be diminishing returns.
No, I think even if you guys are all trying to nerd this out, here's what Ruskin says. You get the quality of art of the nation is directly tied to its morality and virtue, and I like to think under King Avery that the moral would instantly improve thanks to the amount of beating he's giving out on a daily basis.
You tear down the high places and restore the kingdom.
It's a two-pronged attack. One is moral, and then the other is funding the arts, and
because
between the two, yeah.
here's what I say: if you look at the golden ages of art production, it's tied to wealth as well. You know, think about whatever the golden age of Dutch productions. It's either during the kind of Burgundian Flemish medieval period, so you've got like Bruegel and Northern Renaissance gang happening with the wool explosion of Burgundy, or think about your Van Dycks and Rubens, etc., tied to Dutch wealth and the Dutch Empire at the same time. You need money for art. Art is like a massive loss-making operation, basically. It's like, so yeah, I think you're right in the sense that you can't. I'm not a believer in that you can just like buy great art, but at the same time, I think it is one and a very important fuel for the fire. But like I said, you know, Ruskin says at the same time, you know, how can you create these amazing transcendent works of art when everyone in the nation doesn't even look to the heavens, they look to the gutter? You know, that's his fundamental point. How can you show the heroism of a figure from the Iliad, for example, when there's no one heroic in your life as you live it? You know. So yeah.
To get to your first point about the art adding value or improving upon it, I think that I agree wholeheartedly. One of my favorite things that that film has done, I think, also is from the Passion of the Christ, because they have the great scene when Pilate asks in John 18:38, "What is truth?" And I think that it just fits so perfectly visually because it's Pilate standing before the incarnation of truth, and you know he has no, you know, of course Jesus doesn't answer him as it says in Scripture, but to see it visually, I think, is adds great value to it. But the second point you make is very true, that you can make great works of art, but if the culture is illiterate in the things that you find worthwhile, it's very difficult to get them on board. So Luke, you know, whipping people to get them back into moral shape is essential. But I mean, for Americans especially, it's really depressing because we've become sort of culturally nominally Christian in a lot of ways, and all of the American canon of literature is so steeped in scriptural references that if you don't know scripture, you cannot understand the works of any great American writer. You can't read Faulkner's Absalom, Absalom, or Going Down Moses without knowing anything about Exodus or Deuteronomy or any of the Old Testament. And unfortunately, it's so lost for most people these days when they try and pick up and even read a contemporary of the later 20th century, like Cormac McCarthy. It's still steeped in scripture, and people don't understand it.
Yeah, I mean the same is true for all the British works as well.
Yeah. The whole Western canon, my friend, is basically pick up your Bible first, and then you'll start to understand what's going on. So
the thing that's crazy about that is it means that people now can no longer even understand the kind of bookend of the Christian era in the West, like the collapse, because all the works that were produced in the 20th century describing this collapse rely on a common knowledge of the Bible. so you have people looking at the works of artists and authors of the 20th century that are the kind of like the last embers of what was Christendom, and people can't even read these works that were written maybe 50 years ago and understand them because the common foundation has just been pulled out, which is kind of insane. Like, you can understand it for maybe a work that's 5 or 6 centuries old, but things that are even recent, like film, for example. If you watch film prior to about 1960, or like all variety of films have Christian references in them. The subject matter is often very highly Christian prior to the 1960s as well, which is kind of amazing. But yeah, it means this whole era is just like you might as well be illiterate.
Do you think that the 60s really were this unique period of cultural acceleration in the way that it's mythologized?
I think it's when the pot boiled over, right? So if you put a pot on the stove and you turn up the heat, there's a moment at which the water foams and boils and pours out onto the stove. It's not that moment seems sudden, but it's not like it's not like the heat suddenly began in the 60s. It certainly transformed society, though. I think that's pretty
Yeah,
it's like unarguable that it didn't.
I have
That it did.
I have such a lot of affection for a lot of the art and culture that was popular in the 70s and 80s. And I find this hard to reconcile with the sort of scorn that I also feel drawn to have for the 60s. Do you know what I mean? That the 60s
Okay, I'll tell you
led
why.
to the 70s and 80s.
No. The 70s is the most reactionary
Oh,
decade in the 20th century. Okay,
interesting.
all the psychedelic posters, I don't know if you know this, they're all based on secessionist and late Victorian posters.
Huh.
So just type in whatever, like a Jimi Hendrix Experience poster, for
Okay.
example.
Yeah, I'll find one.
That kind of like what we associate as psychedelic style is basically that they took the route of something that came out of like Austrian secessionist high art, which is kind of like
something like this.
Okay, no, not at all. Okay, I'll find a good example.
This looks like a modern recovering of.
This is sad. The font. Can you see the font there? that font was used in the Sacrum, which is the secessionist artistic newspaper, and that was created by Moser. Yeah, this is a little bit. I'm thinking like actual posters rather than.
Okay.
But so like from like a stylistic point, they're looking back into the past. There's a big revival of like Alice in Wonderland, etc. So again, more Victoriana in the dress. Have you ever heard of what's the guy's name now? It's like something like Fish. Yeah. Okay, here. This is what I'm talking about. This is an actual poster now. So all of these mega bright colors, for example, this is straight out of 1900s turn of the century styles. The graphic style where they basically remove all like
thresholding
black lines. Yeah. This could be straight out of something like the Beggar Staffs or George de Feur, I can't remember say his name, who's like a Art Nouveau designer. And then all the fonts they just ripped from these turn of the century. So it's a really interesting, in my opinion, the 70s artistically are constantly looking back to the Victorians, because again, it's like all of their grandparents lived through that experience and they're all dying off. There was even like a TV show where they would have like this Victorian variety show and they would all dress up like Victorians. Okay, you guys talk for a bit. I'm going to try and find a picture because it's quite funny.
I was going to ask whether you thought the return to more floral and excessive outfits was also a reflection of this, because the 70s kind of known for having like really horrible people with a really horrible dress sense. But actually, I think that's also just because the sort of clothes like this. I'm thinking of the kind of shirts and blouses and things like that.
Well, there was an element of this. There's an element of this where, for example, they would use William Morris fabrics. So, for example, there was lots of William Morris, or you could think about Laura Ashley in the 70s, would often rip off Morris prints, but then they would change the colorways on them. And I think that's what it was. It was like, I would describe it as Victorian aesthetics, but scientific, like all of these new scientific colors that weren't around. There was a scientific color revolution that happened that let you do all of these kind of super vibrant colors. Like in the Victorian period, very restricted in terms of what you could do. Some of the kind of most beautiful colors, as you probably know, were poisonous, like arsenic green and arsenic purple, for example. Have you ever read the book?
Wasn't there uranium
wallpaper
was used for color, right?
Yeah, that's more in the 20s, and it's uranium glass, and then it will light up. The electrons activate, so it sort of luminesces in UV light. There was even like a story called the I think it's called the Yellow Wallpaper, where again it's implied that this kind of poisonous wallpaper was sort of like making the woman go mad, but she was actually getting gaslighted by her husband. I found the program, and it's called The Good Old Days. I'm just trying to find a zoomed in picture, but this was like really popular daytime TV, where they would basically get everyone to dress up like Victorians. And then it was just like a Victorian like variety show. So they would have like actors, or do you know what I'm saying? Like the Americans call it vaudeville. I put a picture in private chat so you can see the audience, but this is like obviously look, this is color TV, so this is like 60, 65, 66. So it's a weirdly, it's definitely worth watching one of these episodes because it's just literally they've got a live band at the front. It's a very surreal experience. You've got things like Camberwick Green coming on the TV as well. Think about that. This is all in the 70s. So and then musically, if you tuned into Nathan Hood's Arthur Stream, you've got Rick Wakeman with his King Arthur prog album. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, for example, like Emerson literally wrote a prog classical composition as part of one of his works in the 70s. There's a big revival of craft.
Was this harking back to the Victorians or like the 40s and 50s?
No, this is all Victoriana basically.
Okay.
And maybe like Edwardian period as well, like post Empire. But it's this is an anti-American. So, for example, I mentioned Emerson, Lake and Palmer. One of their most famous songs that Emerson did before he formed the supergroup was with the Nice, and he did a cover of America. The famous Gershwin song. But it was done in like an ironic "We Hate America" kind of way, basically. So part of this is kind of like an anti-American reaction to the Americanization of the country, like a post-imperialism, I think, as well. So that's why I think that the 70s was cool. The 80s was cool because basically it's all people won't necessarily like it, but it's all fascist aesthetics. Basically, the 1980s looks come straight out of 1920s. Futurist Italy, basically. All of the steel, all of the glass, like maybe like the neon, for example, is definitely like there's a new twist on it, but it's basically Italian modernism is how they would describe it. But the aesthetic tone is basically the mid-century Italians. I mean,
the Edwardian design that you were showing there with the stage in the 70s in the U.S., it's being lampooned in the late 70s, early 80s. Jim Henson makes fun of it, of course, with the Muppet Show, and then of course it sort of gets a weird parody revival in some Broadway runs in the U.S. at that time. Whereas, while there's that anti-imperialist feeling in Britain, in the United States, the 70s is this time of not only radical leftist violence and bombings, but the music is a reflection of, I think, a post-revolution, I dare say, maybe a post-coital regret or some kind of high where they recognize, oh, we've done something absolutely terrible and things are only going to get worse. I think that the music that kind of embodies the decadence and the destruction of sort of America's civic and social life in the 70s is Steely Dan of all bands, because it just highlights the post hippie reaction to Richard Nixon, but also that things are just only going to get worse because we've had all this hedonism and the climax of these social movements, and now we're going to reap what we sow, and we're going to try our best to enjoy it, even though it's going to be very bitter.
Luke, I can see you've been trying to find good quality images, and this is one thing I wanted to bring up, which is the massive decline of Google in its ability to show actually accurate information anymore. Because this is an actually 80s apartment as opposed to the visual slop that was coming up beforehand. The kind of
it was pretty useless, wasn't it? Okay, so this is more what you're talking about. This one.
It's what I'm talking about. It's basically like there is a barrenness to it. It's almost like quasi brutalist to it. Like obviously there are new elements. There's like 80s has got a definite Japanese aesthetics feel to it at the same time. There's lots of kind of whatever the rising Japanese power, etc. And like, for example, can you see the futon bed there? It's like straight out of Japan. I love that their TV is that crappy little CRT in the corner there. If only this was what modern houses rather than the horrible LCDs.
Well, this is the sort of house setup where I would imagine there to be like a jacuzzi in the corner, so that the carpet could gradually humidify over time and become grottier and grottier. I think it might be Scarface, where there's a room that's designed a bit like this, where
So
it's like a nice layout, but you really don't want the water features that they include in it.
So for comparison, then,
This is the mid-century Germans. Totally different. You got to understand the Germans had the Germans. Okay, people weren't like this. Well, some people were like this. Germans basically didn't have tastes, while the Italians had taste, and that's why Italian fascism.
just look at who makes the suits these days.
Well,
It's not the Germans, is it?
No, well, okay.
Or maybe there is German suits that I'm not aware of.
I'm very against Nazi Germany aesthetics. I think it's just really boring, and I hate the architecture. But I'm a huge fan of Italian futurists, because everyone forgets that Mussolini was around for like 20 years. He was what was he came to power in like 2022. So he had a long period where he was producing buildings. Like if you go to Rome, for example, if you go to EUR, there's this entire little kind of architectural area. The fact is that Mussolini worked closely with a number of very important artists to create a vibrant and powerful movement that was very, very influential, not just in Italy, but then it cascaded down. And like I said, I'll see if I can find some Italian futurist like 20s buildings just to kind of give you some kind of compares and contrasts. But there is this kind of a lack of ornament. There's a brutality to it. You're just finding the worst photos today, Lee.
Would you like the other Italian futurists, Pharaoh? Would you ban pasta?
I would not ban pasta. I love pasta.
All right, just making sure.
Can I just say that my daughter will, like, one of her favorite things is just eating raw pasta, and it's one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen a human
cooked.
No, she has it cooked.
Well, that's all right. I mean, it's certainly better to eat it raw than with like tomato ketchup.
My daughter eats pasta with ketchup.
What is this battle of who's got the worst daughter?
Yeah, well,
after the discussion of pride at the beginning of the show, you're just flexing your humility as parents.
when you're like 2 years old or just under 2, you haven't really developed any sense of discrimination yet, so you don't really know that ketchup with pasta is plebeian. You just consider it to taste better than the other food on your plate.
Okay, I've got a link from you, British Berean.
Yeah, I don't know whether this is the sort of stuff that
you're thinking of.
I found these seem to be designs for structures that seemed pretty good.
This is a good externals. I'm trying to find some internal shots to kind of compare and contrast with the 80s interiors to kind of show you guys. This is a picture from I've just sent around from the I don't know if that's worked from The Conformist. If you've ever seen that film before, which is all like but you see what I'm saying? It's kind of like these kind of large spaces, like all the ornaments gone, all the moldings are gone. It's concrete floors. But there's a quality of material at the same time. And I think fundamentally underpinning 80s aesthetics is this quite powerful interior style. Although, like I said, they kind of have a twist on it, which is more modern materials, which I think don't age very well compared to this.
This makes me think of Blade Runner.
Yeah, well, this one exactly. Yeah, another. That's in the 80s
film.
Yeah,
82. I love this. This I'm convinced by. I do think this, and in similarity, this as well, in comparison to anything produced today, it's not been festooned with regulatory nonsense. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you design a car these days, there's so many rules that you can't make something beautiful. You have to have a certain kind of clarity of mind and freedom to just declutter a space as much as this.
Yeah, I mean that's what Scruton argues, doesn't it? That we're sort of stuck in a bureaucracy haze. I mean, I think there's a truth to it, but I think there is like there's stuff you can do, but I think we just choose
like if
not
you if you wanted to have a meeting in a room like this these days, you'd be told that it's got to be bright enough and it's got to have like amenities and all kinds of.
I mean, some of the
horrible-
regulations we have just literally prevent us from making beautiful buildings because otherwise they would be inhospitable to the disabled, right? So you can't have structures with exterior staircases that are the only means of entry, for example.
Big bright fire sign over here lighting everything up.
yeah, exactly. It's funny because it's a kind of type of it's kind of the saddest type of communism. I don't think that Stalin, for example, would have had any qualms about preventing people with wheelchairs getting into his buildings just to make them look nice. Like he would have been fine with that. Whereas we just embrace the ugliness.
Not enough corporate Memphis these days. It'd be all over that room.
Yeah, they'd have a mural on the floor. You'd have a mural on the floor of like.
No, it'd have to be on. It'd have to be on the walls or the ceilings because they don't want you trotting on all those diversity and whatnot.
But interestingly about this, I see this image, and I guess the room that it's depicting as beautiful, in a similar way to how I would feel about looking at a meadow or something. Like, it's a completely artificial space, and it wouldn't be improved by adding nature to it, and nor would the meadow be improved by having a concrete floor running through it. It's like somehow the space is cohesive. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, it's about harmony. It's about purity. It's about repetition. I mean, I would say that there are two great pulls from beauty, and it's the pull for purity and the pull for ornament. Basically, those two sides, and the whole of like art history has been.
I struggle with ornament. Like the stuff we were looking at earlier,
because you're a programmer. That's why. You use Apple products. I bet. Are you an Apple guy? Do you use only Apple stuff? Yeah.
I admire Apple's purity. I probably prefer it for beauty. I actually end up using Windows and Android in practice. I mean, that's what I would actually say. Programmers in general are not Apple people. And programmers just don't have any appreciation for aesthetics at all. So really, the people who use Macs are artists and designers. Like if you go to a hipster cafe and there's somebody in there who's designing a website, then they'll be on a Mac. But the person who's developing the software that does some new pioneering feature has probably got a ThinkPad or a desktop in a basement somewhere.
Or they're using Temple OS, and I mean, talking about programmers not having any artistic sense. I think that that Terry Davis and Temple OS kind of defies that with its striking beauty and unique style. I think there is
Terry Davis was based in a certain way, right?
He was, yeah, in more than one certain way, yeah. I think programmers do have a certain sense of beauty, though. I mean, if you can tell a quality programmer by how they structure their code. There is such a thing as like a well-structured program, and a sloppy program, it's an inaccessible thing for analysis for people who aren't programmers. But there are genuinely, beautiful and ugly programs.
So, do Do you think, Pharaoh, do you think you would be able to, I don't know how familiar you are with coding. Do you think you'd be able to appreciate the beauty in a piece of software?
I gotta be honest with you. So this is the prideful aspect of programmers. I heard a flipping JavaScript developer saying, in some ways, isn't JavaScript code beautiful? And I was like, no, it is not beautiful. It's the worst flipping language out there in the first place. You suck.
What you're saying
Your
here is
language sucks.
you're just like you're just like someone who can't read French saying there's no such thing as a well-written French novel.
That's where you're wrong, British Barian, because I spent ages to learn Golang for a long time and produced several backend applications with it, but then decided that it was a total waste of time, and then had never picked up my notepad again since that moment.
This is the pride of the novice, I think. Unfortunately, Pharaoh, coming to bite you.
No, I know. I'm not proud of it, by any means. But I know it. I know it more than the average person, I would say. It's like this also goes into engineering, and I saw there was a big thread about. It was this guy talking about planes, and how like planes as an art object, and. This is the problem between like art and craft, and there's obviously things that are definitely craft, and there's things that are definitely art, and there's this hazy ground in between the two. A plane, in my opinion, is relatively on the craft side. Coding language is so far on the craft side, you know. It definitely is there. So I'm very against the stolen valor of these programmers pretending for a second that they have a creative bones in their body.
I think we should redefine creative, because there's kind of a very straightforward etymological route that goes from like the act of making something, and then you say, okay, a creative person is able to make something. You know, that you have to be creative to for example, if you're problem solving, it's useful to be creative, because then you can come up with lots of potential solutions to the problem. And then the term creatives also gets applied to people who have taste and make stuff that is beautiful and aesthetic. And I think we need a different term for that second category, because you're right that somebody who's programming, I don't think to do the programming needs to have any kind of like taste or ability. You know, they don't have to be able to produce things that are aesthetic, but they do have to be creative in order to problem solve.
I mean, that word creative is a bit of a tricky one anyway, in that 9 out of 10 uses of it just mean they can make stuff, or it's almost always related to novelty rather than beauty or depth. So for example,
Nathan Hood says the second category is just art. That's probably a fair comment.
Yeah, maybe art or artist. I mean, I don't think. I mean, I doubt that that's not the use you're using of it, Pharaoh. But it is very common for people to talk about creativeness and creativity when what they just mean is just mere novelty.
Here's a word for you, because it's sort of come out of favor, and I don't know if you know this. The idea of creativity itself is like a 19th century romantic invention by Coleridge specifically, and the whole idea of being a creative person or having imagination even was basically just made up by Coleridge, or I should say identified, really, because I do agree with him to a degree.
Agree with him, okay.
But well, I mean, I think it's obvious that because he was interested in like how do we come up with things. Like this is sort of goes into some previous discussions we've had, Luke, about can we create anything new, etc. And creative faculty. The Romantics were obsessed with novelty, you mentioned that the idea of novelty, creating newness, and they thought that anything new was fundamentally good because it was more creative. So the more creative you are, the better the artist you
Deeply
are.
subversive.
Well, what
a progressive attitude.
It's like a ploy by big Coleridge to get all the money funneled into his estate.
There is a truth to that, but then I think the other side is, what if everything is the same? That's just pure ossification.
Well, so I'd say being able to generate novelty and new things is surprisingly rare skill. And the first time I was aware of this was watching that show, The Apprentice. You know, they get these challenges and they're all a bunch of go-getting business people. And they're asked to, I don't know, come up with a name for a new brand of orange juice. And there's 8 of them in the room for an hour, and they don't come up with any. One person maybe comes up with one idea.
The reason why, Luke, is because they're not good people. If you're on the TV Apprentice, you're not good at business, buddy. Sorry.
I studied The Apprentice assuming that they were a completely representative sample of humanity. Is that not accurate? But I do think it's true in general that I've been surprised at most people's inability to just come up with new ideas. And the observation is always made that children can do it, but we lose our imagination. And then some people go further and say that is a product of our education system, that we're discouraged.
Well, no, but this is, again, that is a romantic idea. So, for example, William Blake, who was tied to romanticism, he created a poem anthology called like Poems of like Life and Experience or something like that. But it's basically contrasting oldness and lived experience versus new creativity. And he was constantly saying, look, you want to be more childlike, because again, he had a very weird philosophy of life, like pseudo-Christian, where he believed that the more you lived in the world, the kind of less
pure.
Exactly. That's Innocence and Experience. That's actually the name of the book. You reminded me properly, Luke. So
me and Blake are on the same page.
Well, exactly. I mean, he's a pretty cool guy. But we are living in the shadow of romanticism, even today. I mean, are kids more creative? I don't think that's true. I feel like they're less inhibited, and they have a lot more time. And I think that I think that's like. But do they really produce novelty? That's the question.
You could argue that that historically they've been bored, and that's led them to creativity. I wonder if these days, with all the iPads and everything that the under threes are raised on, that maybe they're not showing the creative streak anymore. I don't know. It'd be interesting to
well, they might be more fractal and iterative. All this discussion about creativity, I think you see it also reflected in the standards for intellectual property law. This is about to get really dry, but bear with me. So, for instance, we talk about inventive acts or being creative. So, for a while in the United States, there was a doctrine for patentability for testing, and it was called the flash of genius test. And it was, and it's also known as it was also a film made in 2008, but that's a whole other separate thing. It's actually a pretty good movie. But the doctrine was about an inventive act must come in a flash of genius, not as a result of tinkering. Quote, the new device, however useful it may be, must reveal a flash of creative genius, not merely the skill of the calling. If it fails, it has not established its right to a private grant on the public domain, end quote. This would last for about a decade. It did not last very long. And it went to a standard of non-obviousness. So it shouldn't, patentability shall not be negated in the manner in which the invention was made. And that's sort of been the way going there. Although it is interesting to go back towards the idea of epiphany or eureka, or trying to build the better mousetrap. All the old sayings there. But I think with respects to art, I think that it will we're in a very interesting place because we were talking about not being scripturally literate earlier. I think with artistically, if we don't have great works of art that you and I can appreciate, it's going to be what are people going to appreciate now? I mean, the whole brain rot discussion about TikTok or whatnot. I think that's going to have a huge influence. Art that will capture the mind and imagination for 15 seconds or less before you move on to the next painting in the gallery. But who knows where elite tastes will go in the meantime? But I think that there is something to say about the creative mind. I think will be based on a more technical look at what's already been done and trying desperately to not be seen as a rip-off of somebody else, which is like the tale as old as time, right? No one wants to be a rip-off of anyone else. But I think that because we've become so iterative and formulaic that, we've tried being, quote, subversive in our expectations for film and TV, that I think we might see a return to classic formulas and structures of art and filmmaking.
Hmm.
Can I step back to the child as creator again? And here's my two challenges for you, Luke. Number one is,
Okay.
if children are so creative and so novel, like, why don't we just like have child factories where we're just like asking them questions for things and they come up with really good ideas? Do you know what I'm saying? Why doesn't that happen? Why don't you sort of shake them
Is that
down?
an actual proposal? I mean,
That is, yeah.
The children yearn for the brainstorming minds.
Exactly. Down the brainstorming mind. I'm just imagining like a whole team of experts just going to the child and be like, "Oh my goodness, just so much gold here." He's just, here's the reality. Oh, what have you drawn, daughter? Oh, I've drawn a part bird, part man, part dog creature. That's a typical.
let's be honest. If
presentation.
if that was found on a wall of an ancient Roman property, you'd be telling us how brilliant the craftsmen were who created it. I think you're discounting how actually genius children are.
I think that this idea of the creativity of the child actually ties in quite closely to the progressive theories of education. One of the prevailing ideas in education, which arose very firmly in the 19th century and is still with us to this day, is that children are essentially pure and children are essentially good, and that it is only through miseducation that children become impure and become sort of maladapted members of society.
This is sounding like Rousseau.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so Rousseau would be the sort of even more historic root of this kind of type of thinking. Though, I mean, this type of thinking has existed since sort of time immemorial, but in terms of these ideas captivating the whole of Western society, that really happened in the 19th and early 20th century. But there are a lot of these educators who really had angelic ideas of children, and genuinely believed that if you just educated people right, that would fix all kinds of things. And you see this everywhere as well. I mean, you see it with the prison system, where the idea is that if you simply educate prisoners properly, then you can reform them. And it's just about like putting these right processes in place, because the innate human essence is good, and all we have to do is to make sure that the structures are correct. And obviously this is nonsense, and it's probably nonsense. Well, it's almost entirely nonsense in this area of creativity as well, because the children who are creative have no knowledge. They've not been given any of the base facts from which to produce genuinely creative ideas. So they're just mashing together the random assortment of details that they do know, and come up with just pointless suggestions and things. They're amusing, they're enjoyable to hang around with, but they're not they're not like moving society forwards in any fashion.
I think that in the spirit of the wisdom literature, where we can say things that are broadly true without having to say it's going to happen every single time, the child who is raised well will become a better person, both morally, in terms of the quality of the art that they produce, in terms of the quality of the engineering that they do and the hard work that they do. And even I would say that if you treat prisoners correctly, they're more likely to be reformed as well. I think the systems, as you described them, that we try and put in place are probably ineffective because, for example, the type of system that leads to good parenting is like the encouragement of families, strong marriages. There's all kinds of things, Christian moral teachings that lead to those outcomes. And so you can't replace that with like a top-down bureaucratic government structure. But I would stand up for a family and even like broader family, extended family structures is a structure, and it does genuinely lead to good outcomes. And I would go so far as to say that the children have something that, if properly nurtured, would have become better and more impressive as an adult, but is so badly malnourished that they lose it, and that the adults that we tend to run into are deficient in comparison with how they were when they were children, because they've been like they've had such a battering from society and the education that they've been attacked with, that they actually, they're like disabled in a certain way.
I
Go ahead.
stand by. You got to highlight Nathan's comments here, because this is the true. Yes, yeah. The Puritan understood that the child's rebellious will should not be free; it must be broken.
and you break them in the minds.
Exactly, down the brainstorming minds.
I think that was the actual term used as well. The breaking of the will was a pretty core component of Puritan education. Genuinely.
Okay, but there's also the child's will to good, and if we just completely shackle the child, then we've dealt with the rebellious will, but that doesn't encourage virtue. Like somebody who's unable to act is also unable to do good. So I think this statement could be taken the wrong way.
Well, I think the samurai were famous for never chastising their children, lest they quash the warrior spirit within.
Yes.
I think the Puritan idea wasn't to destroy the child's independence and boldness, but it's simply for them to recognize their place within the hierarchy of life. So if a child was disobedient to their parents, they must have their will broken in order to recognize that their parents are their superiors. But if they were free in other respects, then that was to be welcomed. The intention was not to make children into like happy long-housed peoples, but so that they could recognize their right, their superiors, and how to defer to them. I think anyway.
Yeah, I was just looking through a list of the things that the Romantics stood for, and I just think I'm just a romantic out of time. I love all this, emotion, imagination, nature, the sublime, the exotic. These are speaking to me much more so than frilly ornamentation that you were talking about earlier. Endless patterning and complication.
Come on, hold on a second. What about like a perpendicular cathedral? Have you never gone into a Gothic cathedral, Luke, and felt something in your bones? You just thought, I'm going to whitewash the walls.
I'll be honest, Gothic style is, to me, quite an acquired taste that I've been struggling with. I don't have an immediate appreciation for Gothic architecture. Whereas, I read that as
I don't have a soul. I'm not a human being. I'm
Well,
just an automaton.
Just wait till I finish my sentence. When I was little, I used to just love big glass buildings, like big square, featureless, modern monstrosities. Those I saw the appeal of those straight away.
I feel
The
like this explains your career path.
Yes, exactly. And I've
Smartless.
kind of my soul has awoken, and now I just find myself both trapped in a profession that I struggle with, and also regretting all of my previous taste.
Now, going back to this idea of like Puritanism versus ornamentism or whatever, I do genuinely think that human beings are literally born one way or the other. You either have a Gothic soul or you have a kind of Puritan soul. That's why there's these constant swings between the classical and the Gothic, or like high ornament. So we talk about like neoclassicism. Well, there's been about, if you actually look and see how many times there's been classical revivals, it's like half, literally half the time from Rome's fall have there been attempts to bring back some form of purer, more idealized forms. I've put in a Gothic classic again. You choose it.
Okay.
I've got a good link in chat here. This is from the Lady Chapel from Westminster. This is the highest form of English Gothic here. The perpendicular style.
Trypophobia in building form.
But also, I don't see the LGBT flag in that collection.
we'll be seeing. You haven't been there down there recently, you see. If you go there now, where the Knights of the Garter once stood, each flag is a different gender. Actually, now they've got all of the genders. They've managed to capture them all. I am the knight of the non-binary.
So my feeling, like, just as an immediate reaction at a sort of deep subliminal level, being confronted with this, is it's like it's too much pattern. There's all this going on up here, all this different colors here. So there's a different kind of texture down here. The floor is another thing. This in the middle. I mean, I think this is probably like just heading towards the kind of autistic sensory overload reaction. When people need just simplicity because they get overwhelmed easily. Maybe that's the issue I have. I can kind of, given enough time to sort of relax and appreciate it, I can actually, I enjoy the symmetry of it, and the order where you have all the bright primary colors grouped into certain places. So there's lots here to like, but I just wanted to say my immediate reaction to it is not necessarily positive.
What I would say is that the greatest ornamental work it's not about having infinite detail. This is where people go wrong. It's about harmonized intricacy is how I describe it. So you mentioned having those kind of bigger forms. So if you look at the back, what they're all pointing to is the Gothic arch here, which is effectively a curved gable, two lines colliding in a point with a curve. So if you can sort of see those kind of undercurrents, or you can see the kind of almost Tudoresque points down from the ceiling. But what's happened is that they've been added to with all of the kind of dense, intense ornaments to such a degree that it has like there's sort of different levels of shape and form at the same time. So you can look at it from afar as one form, but as you get closer, the ornament reveals more and more further forms. So it's not necessarily about
unsettling.
Yeah, well, it is unsettling, but there's life is unsettling again. Ruskin described Gothic as the Gothic imagination as the deranged imagination. There is a darkness to it. There is a violence to it at the same time. So I think the best of the Gothic form is, or like the best of the ornamented form, is this idea of both changefulness but also harmony, and also there's a lot of naturalism in it as well. The people think that perpendicular is kind of pulled from like bone structures within animals. This is almost like the inner rib cage of a giant dead giant or something like that. So we're constantly being pulled back to nature at the same time. All of the use of, you've got your glass or whatever. Well, it's an inorganic material. You don't find it naturally, while the beautiful hand hewn stone and the carved oak is all natural materials taken from nature itself.
Kate J in chat says Rococo is a guilty pleasure. So this is an example of Rococo, right? Now, I hate to disagree, but I find this it's almost like viscerally unpleasant. It's something about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult. I would say that for me, because Rococo is specifically, like, I would say High French Baroque. So Baroque specifically, okay, I've given an entire art lesson now. Are you ready? Baroque is a reaction to Palladianism. You may have heard of Palladio, and basically Palladio's whole thing is basically imagine Luke Avery as a classical architect. He loves his boxes, he loves his pure lines and uniformity. Just search for Palladio a second. You got to see the Palladio first, and you can be like, I like this box room.
Palladio like that?
Yeah, interior with the two L's. No, Palladio, Palladio.
Interior.
Yeah, interior. Yeah.
Okay.
The symmetry. It's all about the
like if I was walking through a house and I was previously in the Rococo room and then I arrived in a room like this, I'd be such a relief. I literally would be like breathing again. I feel like my natural environment is a room much more like this.
Well,
basically, and the kind of flouncy, explosion of frills and trinkets that we saw before.
Well, just go back to the other one. So basically, the whole Baroque thing is a reaction and an evolvement of that. Do you know where the word Baroque comes from?
No.
Have you ever seen a Baroque pearl before? It's kind of like instead of having a totally spherical nature, this idea of perfection, a Baroque pearl is kind of like gnarled and slightly curved, but it has a certain attractiveness and beauty to it. I love Baroque pearls. I think but there's a real changeful quality, and that's the idea. It's almost kind of like this warped perfection. So, but Baroque is about saying, look, Palladio he's just too boring. We want to make it more interesting. I almost think of it as kind of like there's a bit of a Gothic element to it. It's like imagine a whole lot of Gothically minded people created classicism. You end up with Baroque, basically. I'm trying to think of like I would say like Versailles is a better example, and that kind of random.
I find the ornamentation annoying in Baroque music as well. I'll be honest. All of those appoggiatura and trills and just play. It's the same thing. I find it annoying in modern music as well, like Mariah Carey. Just sing the melody. Don't go up and down and eventually find your. It feels like it feels like imprecision. This really is revealing my kind of programmer engineer nature, but I just like the clarity.
Like decide where to land and land.
Exactly.
Don't land your aircraft by doing flips before the end.
Yeah. Back to the Rococo, decide where your pillar is, and this is actually a chandelier. But okay, this is a better example, right? You've got your painting, it's that shape. Why have you got these tendrils reaching out like some kind of a bacterial growth? Yeah, it's like the
Cthulhu was a Rococo appreciator.
Yeah, it's this sort of deep sea octopus creature that's just crawling throughout the rest of the entire image in some horrific, This is like
I'm gonna stand for Rococo here. Again, you've just chosen like a really like average basic image again. I've put in chat. Here's what like
all right, let's see.
proper high Rococo is, and I want you to remember back to what I was saying about this idea of high ornament being harmonized detail. And this is one of the rooms from the Versailles. It's all about these bigger forms, which have then been kind of supplemented and enhanced and layered in with all of the ornament. I mean, I gotta say, I'm not the biggest Rococo fan. I hate Pooty. They love Pooty. It's the little cherubs across the top there. But you got to say that this.
I'll try and ignore the cherubs.
This
I kind of like the cherubs.
Oh, hate them.
Barrow, should you and I just gang up on British Berean and take down on cherubs?
I just think they're kind of quirky.
But you see what I'm saying? This is almost like this idea of similar to the Gothic, where again you've got this overabundance of ornament, but it's harmonized and it's tied together. But also there's other, like I said, there's other influences from a design perspective, weirdly more classical. But I always like to say it's classical through the Gothic lens, basically.
This kind of makes me feel like if you were gonna use silver to portray the aesthetic of like blood splatter going up a wall, is what they've achieved with with all these little dots and lines. To be fair,
it's like Terminator 2 after the villain's been shot.
Yeah, there's something kind of body horror about Rococo. But if I'm going to be a bit more generous to the style, maybe my real feeling towards it is just that it's not for me because it feels kind of feminine. Like, actually, if I imagine this from a feminine lens and relate it to things like, you know, a mirror that you might have in your handbag, or like a makeup, you know, set. You know, all these. I don't really understand. You know, like this kind of like location in the house where a woman will sit and kind of apply various you know, various paints onto her face and such, as I understand it.
To the ladies retire and paint their faces.
But Rococo is the appropriate aesthetic for a you know, makeup station.
I mean, it is French. It is French, so it has a distinct level of femininity to it, unbeknownst to any other style.
And in that sense, like a world that contains some of this, I like that has its place and it's contained, and it doesn't rule the world. It's just in its proper, you know, there is a realm for me with those previous ones that looked like a you know, a gentleman drawing room, or like a saloon, or something kind of manly and masculine, without a bunch of frivolous nonsense. And then you've got a space like this where you can go crazy and have all of your feminine wiles, and you know, everyone's got their own space. So if you want to disagree with me and say you like Rococo, that's fine, but I am going to say you're a girl for liking it.
What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find a picture of a Baroque English building, which I think you'll have a natural affinity to instead. Okay, hold on, I found one. Like, you're right. Rococo specifically is very feminine. The Rococo, interestingly, is derived from like the scallop shell, because I think that the French for scallop shell. This is like a post-Ren Baroque church, which again, if you see a church in London, it's probably going to be a Baroque church, because all of these are built after the Fire of London, 1666. So it just happens to be that at the same time as like the London's greatest building project. So you can see that this isn't one of your clean cut Palladian modernist buildings. It does have ornament. It does have overabundance. It is a fussy building, but I think it's undeniably masculine at the same time, like the four towers.
Yes,
on
very
the top.
square.
So you have that kind of symmetry that would appeal to you, but there is a lot of complexity at the same time. In a way, this is a very
this stuff all feels
unclassical-
quite Hellenistic. You think
Yeah,
it's not classical? Oh, classical. Yes, I see what you mean.
But it's okay. It's using motifs and little elements. So, for example, that thing at the top that is called the triglyph, for example, or the use of a pediment. You know, the big triangle at the top. But what they've done is they've put hollowed columns in there. Like that whole thing is like totally novel. And if you showed that to a Greek, if you pulled him back in time, he'd be like, "What have you done to my beautiful temple?"
Well, I'm with the ancient Greek. I think this is not an improvement on the original form. I think stick a bunch of people representing gods in this triangle. You know, big improvement.
How about small children people with wings? You could call them. I don't know.
I do like the human form in principle as a thing to depict. Although I'm not sure I would ever actually choose it. Do you see what I mean? Like I sort of I admire it in principle, but I think my actual tastes would never allow me to have a statue of a person in my garden, for example.
Okay, I've got a different style for you, Luke. Have you ever heard of Empire style before? I've put it in chat again.
Oh, I'm excited to learn about this.
Yeah. So basically, after Rococo, unsurprisingly, spending an absolute ton of cash on very expensive gold and silver plated buildings caused the French economy to collapse, thus creating the French Revolution. And then basically, Robespierre had no taste. So nothing of interest happened until you come to the kind of post-Napoleonic period, basically, and there's this kind of another wave of classicism in French. So this is kind of like
it's better. I like it more.
The Empire style, but this is kind of like more pure classicism, but also there's a bit more gold. Plus, it's all about tents as well. There's lots of tents involved for some reason.
I
really anchors.
I'm a fan.
All right, this looks like this is a compromise we can all get behind.
I think what I really like about it is that everything's framed really well, so it feels really austere, even though it's quite ornamental and there are a lot of images. It feels very full of form and rigidity. There's something quite calming about that.
Yeah, there's angles, it's squares, it's rectangles. The kind of fresco work was basically inspired by Pompeii as well, because they discovered it by then, and they were like, "Oh, if the true classical lover has Pompeian frescoes." I've just put another link in chat, Luke, a second, if you want to boost that up, because again, it's
I want those doors. I want those doors in my house.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. It's a lot of it's tied to Napoleon's like campaigns and stuff. So this is literally his kind of like camp bed, which he took. And can you see that the entire room has been spoofed to make it look like you're on campaign? So he's literally so focused on campaign that he changed his interiors.
I think that this is more in a direction I can get behind. I do like the eagle up here. That's pretty cool.
It's the symbol, one of Napoleon's symbols, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. I still think.
Sorry.
The image that's spoken to me the most of this whole fireside chat was the empty room with the concrete room with a bunch of vertical rectangular windows and just everything dark with the light streaming in. Maybe that just means that I'm tainted unavoidably by my modern upbringing, and I can't see the beauty of the past.
No, I think you're either, like I said, you're either a purist or you're an ornamental person. You're either a true classicist or a Gothic leaning. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But
What's an example from an older time period, but with quite a Puritan appeal?
I think
are they not really celebrated?
Yeah, I think if you look at the bit, if you scroll up, Varian sent a good link.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Puritan Chapel.
Is it your most recent link? Langley Chapel.
For me, yes.
Yeah.
Great. Let's look at this. Yeah, see, interesting, because this is very much the religious background that I'm from, right? The plain, empty interior with pews, like totally speaks to, my grandparents on both sides. I think would have, like, if I visit churches from my relatives, this is the kind of aesthetic. So maybe it just comes down to I've kind of inherited some sort of puritanical dislike of decoration, with as a
chapel's
pure
quite
religious reaction. Yeah.
As I say, this chapel's quite special as well, because it's basically been almost preserved in its original form, and it's from the early 1600s. So this is one of the closest examples that you would get of a genuine Puritan, genuine Puritan chapel.
I really do find it easier to engage with this image than the Gothic cathedral interior. Like I like the wooden beams up here. I love this as having been carved. I can like love that more easily than if it had like a zillion little lines and contours all over it. Maybe it's just cultural. Maybe this is what I'm discovering about myself, is that my tastes were formed.
You'd have been a general in Cromwell's army. Let's be honest here, Luke. Come on.
Yeah,
East Anglian Regiment. I've sent another link for another good example, and this is actually from a Dutch church post Protestant Revolution, and I think it's quite a good example because this is a much older building which has kind of been literally whitewashed and been sort of de-iconicized to the Dutch tastes. So this is the kind of total Puritan iconoclast. Luke's,
and I know as a reactionary, I'm supposed to feel horrified at the idea of whitewashing away beautiful ancient art, but I don't have any wish. I don't have any particular desire to see the 10 million tiny paintings of biblical scenes that have been covered up here. I realize how completely horrified everyone with taste who's listening to this is at my opinions, but I'm just telling you,
I'm imagining Luke in the Reformation. He would have been the other Cromwell's most noble servant. He's in the niches. He's ripping the icons down, stamping on the faces of the old saints. Sweet pure lines. Oh, finally we can return. Let me just cover over these frescoes with chalk paint.
I don't like the idea of smashing something that somebody's worked hard on. I'd put it in a basement somewhere, like that last scene from the Indiana Jones film. Giant warehouse with endless crates, and then in a future generation of people who appreciate it better can get it back out and enjoy it. Everyone else disagrees with me, I assume. You don't feel the same.
I have sympathies in both directions actually on this subject. I think I do appreciate the beauty in a lot of the ornamentation and images, but both theologically and practically, I think sometimes it's not a good idea to have churches just full of those things.
Okay.
And
I feel like
I think often the Puritans and Cromwell in particular are slammed for things that either wasn't really their fault or they had some pretty good reasons for it. Cromwell himself was actually a lot more tolerant than people give him credit for. He did want the removal of icons, but he did want it in an orderly fashion. The problem was you were in a period of civil war, so the people who are most fervent will often, just get away with doing things because that there isn't necessarily an authority structure that's going to stop them. So most of the most horrible acts of iconoclasm during the English Civil Wars were not like state sanctioned.
Yeah. Are you saying it's a bit
And
like how people on Jan 6 were kind of politely wandering through the building, and the way the story is told is as if they were all ragingly...
There obviously were, a number of incidents. It's not like this didn't happen, and the aim in many cases was to simplify the church buildings. But where art could be removed and stored rather than destroyed, they would have preferred that in most cases.
Caravaggio says Cromwell was the Tony Blair of his time.
Tony Blair on horseback.
Let's read some of these chats. When I renovated my house, I didn't put my pictures back up because I found the white walls are more relaxing. Interesting. Have you heard this thing that extroverts like a lot of decoration and introverts like everything being plain? Maybe I'm just an introvert. Maybe that's what it comes down to. Not a single cross, not even a wooden one.
Sacrilege, Kate, to even suggest that. That would ruins the minds there. Luke's like thinking, no, we can't have literally...
I'm thinking people are going to be bowing down to that little wooden cross.
Exactly.
Get it out!
I mean, I think, as far as I know, Puritans were fine with simple wooden crosses. They wouldn't have a crucifix, but a simple wooden cross in certain settings, I think. Just like, you're a Baptist, Luke. Baptists today have simple wooden crosses.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say it's common for Baptists to like wear a little necklace with a cross on it, compared to some other. Like I think a charismatic denomination would be more likely to have that kind of thing. I don't know. Yeah, you're right. Having for example, a pulpit with a cross, a simple cross on the front, that would be a pretty Baptist thing to see.
I was going to
didn't go far enough. That's my take.
Yeah, that sounds like you're a iconophile.
Right. Sorry, Pharaoh. Vanity. That's the word I was trying to think of earlier. Vanity. Vanity, vanity. Everything is vanities. If you're in a Rococo building, maybe that's what Ecclesiastes was actually about.
Guys, I was gonna suggest, why don't we get Prue to recommend an Orthodox building as a palate cleanser from this Puritan nonsense.
Oh, look who's joined.
Good evening.
When you say palate cleanser, you mean a palate what's the opposite of cleanse? De-cleanse.
Yes, I'd like that as well. Let me
go find one.
In the meantime,
I know that Orthodox churches, there tend to be a variety as well, right? So
there's a diversity in its architectural styles as well as how the interiors are painted. I mean, for instance, a Russian church will have a lot of interior blue paintings and certain blues to represent the color of heaven, whereas Greek or Antiochian churches will have a green or a red in the interior. So there's some diversity into it, but I mean, the buildings themselves are sort of designed in a structure very similar to these, which of course has been towards sort of an arc or a boat-like structure, even though it's hard to think of it that way. I'm not a big fan of what we were showing earlier with the Versailles. I think, as someone who's done a lot of repoussé work, I just don't like doing it. So I just don't like all of that fringe metal and silver everywhere. I'm like, that takes too much work. Simplify it, make it orderly. I'm with Luke on this one, as some of that did look like bacterial mold growth, and I was not a fan in the slightest. I did like the imperial style, though. I think that was a safe place.
As a bridge back to orthodoxy, let's hear from a Lutheran. Philip, how are you doing?
I do. I'm doing good. Thanks.
I don't think that's how Lutherans like to think of themselves, but from our perspective, you're the closest thing to Catholicism, which is the closest thing to orthodoxy, of course.
Well, with the Orthodox Catholics, the other guys went off the rails. I had to.
Well, true. Depends how you tell the story.
Yeah, I like
But do you-
churches.
What are your thoughts on
Um,
anything that we've discussed, really?
Well, I like Gothic architecture. I haven't been following that closely. I actually just came to apologize
You
to
just
Pharaoh for
dropped in.
saying, yeah, earlier I made an inappropriate comment about just joining to listen to the cadence of his voice and laughing at it whilst not understanding what he actually says.
I heard
It's
it.
It's
about
okay.
my
It's
level.
okay because I've actually just released a 3-hour Pharaoh ASMR video. I'm just me ranting, and you can just tune in and just hear the dulcet tones of Pharaoh.
Fall asleep to Pharaoh.
Exactly. I'm just talking about Ruskin. It's just non-stop Ruskin for 3 hours.
Ways
Once
to-
upon a time, there was a
sounds
boy.
to fall asleep to.
Yes. And as Ruskin once said, boys are...
I think you're going to say the boy's name was John Ruskin.
boy.
And his name, John Ruskin. Be a great way to conclude the tale right there.
Yeah.
Let's see if this link works, and I'll go send.
Stick
see
it
if
in
that
chat. There we
works.
go.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then I'll stick the back of that specific church. See if that works.
So there we go. That
Okay,
worked.
so there you go. This one is the cathedral in Dallas. This is St. Seraphim's
Hmm.
Orthodox Church in Dallas, which is a beautiful place. It's much bigger than it looks. And then here is the backside.
It has a
that
real
you can see.
Technicolor vibe to it. The colors are really vibrant.
Hmm.
It's like watching
It's
Wizard
almost
of Oz. or something.
Hendrix.
And then there's the back. And you can
Very
see
nice.
the front door there.
There's I do somehow vibe with this a little bit more than some of the other stuff we were looking at before, and I'm very interested why. I'd like to sort of deconstruct a little bit. What is it? Maybe it is. I'm starting to think it is just I have an allergic reaction to what I perceive as Catholicism, as a literal like Protestant aesthetic, and therefore,
Knee-jerk reaction.
yeah, and therefore Orthodox art styles are far enough removed that they don't trigger the same kind of instant allergic reaction in me.
I see the cheeky.
By the way,
cherubim
this
there on the
none of this
chandelier.
should be taken as a conscious affront to our Catholic brothers and sisters, whom I love dearly. This isn't a considered opinion. This is just I'm just reflecting on my instinct here.
Mm.
But yeah, this is kind of charming to me in a certain way.
I mean, what I would say is, I think in terms of some of those root forms, it's much simpler. So you got to see this as like this is almost 4 layers to it from the bottom up, where you've got the kind of the layer at the entrance, then this kind of step up, the circle around the top, and then the actual ceiling, and then there's a lantern on the top. So I wonder whether it's like fundamentally there is this kind of simplicity of planes. Then
Yes.
the type of ornament, it's I don't know if this is actually fresco, but it's meant to be like fresco-esque, where it's flat painted. So it's about it is the triumph of color over design, if that makes sense. Like the two big pulls in art are often described as the pull of color versus the pull of design and composition. And actually there's this kind of like simplicity and satisfying repetition in the fact that, look, here's a whole lot of saints, here's a whole lot of iconic figures. I mean, it is mixed up a little bit with those kind of scenes at the top, but they managed to harmonize everything with the color palettes, which are similar the whole way through. So you can see that blue punching through as a background color, the gold pulling things together, almost that kind of dark browns, etc. So I think it's a lot more unified and simplistic, even though there's a lot of complexity to it.
What's that? In Myers-Briggs, there's one of them that refers to whether you see like the big picture, or are you focused on the little details? Which one is that? It doesn't really matter, but you know what I mean, though.
I discount all HR nonsense, Luke. You got to understand. I know you love a test. You love a test like that.
Largely so do I, but so it's either thinking and feeling, or it's sensing and intuitive. But I don't know which one's which. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. The point is, I think I am very much of the big picture person. I like to take a step back and explore things from a top down, broad sweeping picture way. So I think I'm big into form. Like the first thing I will try to do when I look at an image is understand the major shapes and structures. And if I can't grasp onto something from a distance, then I sort of struggle to understand. Like, I don't like to just dive straight in and be like, scattergun, let's look at this bit over here and this bit over here. And then once you've looked at a lot of little pieces, then to harmonize it. I like to start with a really clear view of what's everything we're looking at. Okay, now I've got the scaffolding. Now I can appreciate everything in context. So I wonder if that's one of the things, that when there's so much ornamentation and elaboration and extravagance, that it conceals the forms. It's like I can appreciate ornamentation if it's not so dominant that it's and I think that's a personality thing. That's why I brought up Myers-Briggs, because I can imagine that there's plenty of people who it's irrelevant to them. They don't really care about whether or not there is a higher structure into what they're perceiving. Whereas to me, if I like this form, I sort of don't really care about whether there are details on it or not. It's much less interesting to me.
What you've discovered is a guy called Adolf Loos wrote a book called Ornament and Crime, and he basically laid out those very same things. Can you look up a guy called Louis Sullivan quickly? And Louis is like a turn of the century skyscraper designer in America, and he creates these amazing ornamented skyscrapers. I mean, it's hard to see because of the work. You scroll down, there's like a red building. Look at, if you zoom in there, you can see the kind of level of detail. But interestingly, Luce's point is,
that's very nice.
Yeah, I mean, Sullivan is literally amazing. I absolutely love his work. And also, he was the master of Frank Lloyd Wright as well. People forget that. Wright was his apprentice. But Luce's point is, look, fundamentally, all of this ornament is just like nonsense. It's hiding the form that's underneath. All that skyscrapers are steel and concrete and glass. So like everything else is window dressing, which is sort of a similar to point to what you were saying.
Yes, and I love to see the building that reveals its own like materials. I love when you can see either wood or steel or stone or what, like brick, like whatever it's made of. I like honesty. This is what we tried to build. We found the simplest form for it. We found the best material for it and presented it, and it's beautiful as it is. That's my kind of instinct for what I like to see. I like, if I was to imagine visiting an ancient building that I would really revere, it would be like a super simple Aztec temple or something that's just like completely squared off sides and just a triangle form, like the pyramids in Egypt. I love those, and I don't think they'd be improved by having like an insignia that somebody had. I prefer the pyramids to the Sphinx, for example.
Is there nothing about like so one of the things I like about Gothic churches is the fact that it has these fractal qualities that are like walking through a forest. So it's not honest in the sense that you're like, I want to build a house, so I'm going to make a structure and then just show the structure of houseness. But you're also trying to incorporate elements of the natural world in an artistic way. I don't know. That's something that I like.
I share Philip's sentiment there.
Maybe. I think I feel that there's just something elevated and higher about simplicity, like a Where's Waldo, or
This is Gnosticism, right? We're hearing right now. This is Gnostic thing.
It's
know.
like
if you ever read the Gnostics, they were not about simplicity.
Purity of the soul. This is the purity of the soul, rather than the body.
Am I about to discover divine simplicity as a
Which
theological
part of the
concept?
pleroma is this?
Right. God is the greatest possible being. He's infinitely powerful, not just quite powerful. I think all of these things we can learn from simple art, simple architecture.
Well,
God is a god of order, not of chaos. The broiling sea could be represented by Gothic architecture, and like a nice, simple Greek temple represents the temple of God. How does Revelation describe the New Jerusalem coming out of the sky? It's just a cube.
You're saying that Gothic architecture is like when you get a laptop and you just cover it in decals, like every inch of the surface of the laptop just covered in decals.
No,
it's Gothic. It's Gothic architecture.
Yeah, Luke, I think you're a Muslim now. If you're gonna start going
well, the description of Jerusalem does look a lot like that thing that they all walk around in circles. The
Kaaba
cube, the Kaaba. Yeah. I mean, probably a lot of Christian ideas do end up slipping into Islamic thinking and art, don't they? Because after all, Muhammad was nothing but a rip-off. If you think about what's happened to any property after Disney gets a hold of it, Islam is like the Disneyfied version of Christianity.
You are actually, there's some really interesting stuff here. If we can go into that might get this channel removed. Just search for the Mosque of Damascus. So basically, I don't know if you so some of the most famous early mosques are essentially Byzantine buildings, or certainly. Yeah, there you go. There's a nice external one with some of the mosaics on it.
Which one? There's one on the left.
Oh, I was thinking, that's fine. Yeah, you can sort of see it if you enlarge it. But here's a couple of interesting things. It sort of depends on your view of the history of Islam. But Gibson, who is a Christian scholar of mosques and early Islam, basically thinks that there is this kind of tumultuous period at the beginning of Islam where they weren't that Puritan, interestingly enough, and that's from some. There are a number of early Arabic palaces in the Levant and Jordan with loads of I can only describe as sexy frescoes. Luke, it's basically like women dancing in the scantily, basically.
That doesn't sound like the good old Islam that we all know and love.
Well, this is it, and also there are depictions of people in the currency, for example, until there is a definite point where all of the currency loses all of the ornamentation. But this is one of the earliest, most important mosques, the Damascus Mosque. But interestingly, in terms of floor plan, this is very similar to what St. Paul's was like before it got renovated. So the idea of there's the well, there's the kind of purification area on the left hand side. St. Paul's had one exactly like it. If you look in all of the ornamentation on it, if you zoom in on the on that little box thing, I can't remember what it's for here on the right hand side, but they've got reclaimed capitals from the Roman period. But these are obviously done by Byzantine mosaic artists with these beautiful figurative designs. No, they don't have people in it, which is fair enough. But they still have natural patterns as opposed to
abstract.
Like the abstract geometric nature of later so-called Golden Age of Islam. And then obviously the dome, which we've come to associate as quintessentially Arabic, is in fact, obviously Byzantine, made by Byzantine art. Like, you got to consider the Arabs had, like, this is again, I've got to be careful. They did not have the architectural infrastructure available to create a building of this magnificence, and so they had to rely on Christian locals, basically. So you're right in the fact that all, because again, much of the kind of mosques are derived from these early prototypes. The Dome on the Rock is another classic. Basically, this is another obviously Byzantine building, basically, or created by Byzantine masters. This did have a facelift later on the facade. If you look at the internals, actually, I think it shows off its nature a little bit more.
So what happened?
I'm going to have to bow out, gentlemen.
Thanks for joining us, British Brian.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. And
likewise,
love the conversation, gentlemen. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening.
I was just wondering, with the Hagia Sophia, the Muslims build the turrets, like the small minarets on the side. Why?
Ooh.
So, because I mean that would mean that the church looked kind of similar to this. Maybe I don't have the structure in my head at the moment. But then the minarets came later. What's the significance of that? Because I'm guessing they then just, like,
the minarets are used as a
call to prayer.
high place for call to prayer. They weren't there in the original Hagia Sophia at all.
Yeah. So for example, they're not in the Dome on the Rock. They're not in Damascus. I think it's quite a late. I think it's like a 9th century innovation, basically. But just look at the internals for this, and then if you've ever seen the Hagia Sophia, you've got, it's very similar. You've got the revetments, you've got the polychrome arches. They're literally using a Roman arch, right? So this is one of the most sacred. This is where Muhammad ascended to heaven or whatever. And again, they've got loads of the naturalistic mosaics in it as well. So again, I find it really interesting that basically at the root of certainly mosque architecture is basically Byzantine work. So I was trying to prove to your point that it has this kind of root, and I think I'm very unsurprised. Well, I think I'm quite sympathetic for the religious buildings of other faiths, but I think that this is genuinely the of mosque building, and I'm really unimpressed by. I don't really like the geometric style of, say, for example, the Blue Mosque, which was obviously created as an attempt to, like, do you want to just search for Blue Mosque interior, for example? This, like, when the Ottomans conquered Constantinople, they created this as kind of like, we're going to make a bigger. But I mean, they've made it literally blue there. Maybe they put a filter.
Is that not what it really looks like?
Yeah,
okay.
No.
Google makes it so difficult, because if you go to the image, they just take you to the thumbnail. It's like a very ineffective way to discourage people from copyright infringement. It mostly just seeks to punish streamers who are interested in art.
Yeah, so this is the style, which again, it's kind of like a different form of ornamentation, but by this point, there's definitely, like, they've removed any kind of form of naturalism whatsoever. So again, the Damascus mosaics don't have anything like that at all. It's just like repeated abstract designs at that point. But I mean, this is meant to be one of the greatest mosques, and I think it just doesn't hold a candle to the Hagia Sophia, which is true sublimity and beauty. This is just like like a derivative work, in my opinion.
It reminds me of there's a kind of idle activity that sort of 7 or 8 year olds do when you have a coloring book, and then you pick out 4 or 5 colors and fill in all the little shapes in a sequence, and you get a kind of pretty outcome.
Exactly.
You know, the sort of thing I mean?
It's sort of like color therapy, coloring in therapy books, whatever you said.
Yeah. Exactly. You always pick out you take out your Crayolas and get to work. By the way, I thought it might be interesting to take a quick look at 1 Kings 6, which describes the interior design of the temple. Let me see if I can find
Solomon's, is it?
Yes, the best the better version of the temple. Let me bring up a picture, kind of a rendering of maybe what it might have looked like as cutaway. This is kind of like Sims cutaway wall rendering of the temple. So the passage says that the walls of the temple, both the inner and outer rooms, he carved cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers. He also covered the floors of both the inner and outer room of the temple with gold. The doors were made out of olive wood, and in the olive wood doors he carved cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers, and overlaid the cherubim and palm trees with hammered gold. In the same way, for the entrance to the main hall, he made door frames out of olive wood that were 1/4 the width of the hall. He also made 2 doors out of juniper wood, each having 2 leaves that turned into sockets. He carved cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers on them, and overlaid them with gold hammerings evenly over the carvings. I won't read the whole chapter because it goes on in quite some detail. This text feels like it actually feels like a document that might have been used during the construct. It's like a requirements document because it goes into all the details. But I always thought that was a really interesting detail, that it's got palm trees, cherubim, and all these various flower motifs, and gold, which, you know, they're clearly into the empire stylings as well. Ferry, what do you make?
This is a lot of gold, isn't it? It's like when you hit the gold floor as well. When, you know, it's like maybe too much gold, guys.
Is that enough gold?
Also, I mean, just shout out to Pineapple Capital on the front there. That's what I'm talking about.
The pineapples and palm trees, to me, speak to like slightly chintzy holiday brochure. But what do you think they would have meant to the Hebrew people, the Jews at the time?
Maybe it was a way out, like the first commandment says, make no image of anything that like walks on the earth or whatever. And then they were like, pineapple.
Pineapple and angelic beings.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if the palm tree is again the symbol of life. You've got this idea of was it Corona Vitae or whatever, the tree of life. So maybe it's because it's also tied to like oases and water in the desert, for example. So, you know, there's a symbolic element to it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is what I'm going for. I mean, I got to be honest with you. This is obviously quite sacrilegious. I'm not a fan of like any of these like older style buildings in any way or form. I don't know whether it's hard to tell because you have to. This is why I find some of this quite reductive, and also this is like there's an American disease where they feel like they have to like create these renders and recreations of everything in the Bible, and I think this takes it away from me. This is stealing the majesty of my.
You think I shouldn't be showing this? All right, let's take a look. There we go.
I've already seen. Do you know what I'm saying? It's
endless.
Like Americans love to like. Here's what it would have looked like.
Things.
But
I feel a little bit the same way with. I mean, Prude, you mentioned the Passion of the Christ earlier. I feel a certain, because I've seen Passion of the Christ and clips from The Chosen and various other things, and I feel a bit split, because in a sense it's, it brings the text to life and helps you to embody the world in the first century and everything that was happening. But then in another way, there are certain ways in which any given depiction is always going to fall flat or taint the text with your own, pollute it with your own ideas. And I do feel a little bit the same way as you, Pharaoh, that seeing this depiction is like it feels small compared to the majesty that you get from reading the text.
Yeah, I mean,
I would go ahead.
Sorry, you go, Prue.
It's interesting because I don't think about that film very often when I read upon the Passion. So, for instance, in the Eastern Church, we have the reading of the 12 Passion Gospels. So, I mean, everything that relates to the Passion is read back to back to back on Great and Holy Thursday evening. So, following sort of the Jewish calendar, now the church calendar, that's tomorrow, and so technically the start of Good Friday. And you read everything back to back to back from, the garden all the way up to him being brought down on the cross. And I don't think about that at all. I listen to it being read liturgically and the antiphonal responses to it. And that hits far harder than I think any visual depiction ever can. And so I would highly agree with that you don't want your mind polluted. But I don't ever think about the movie when I'm in that moment in church, when all that's being done, that's being read, because your mind is squarely focused before the gospel is read before the cross. And so you're there, you're visually now transposed to being an onlooker at the Passion and the crucifixion. So if anything, the words transport your mind to that moment, whereas really the only scene I like out of the movie is very good, don't get me wrong, but the only thing that I really think visually it brings out is that scene I mentioned at the beginning of the stream when Pilate asks, "What is truth?" And I've always thought that was such a wonderful artistic rendition, because Pilate is looking literally at the truth, the incarnate word of God, and not, whereas in scripture, so that's the only time I ever think about that movie is that question, well, what is truth, or qui veritas? But yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly that it's better to read it and read it out loud. Scripture, of course, is always meant to be read out loud, and I think it's you don't want your mind polluted by things, and so I think with these things, I think it's always best to leave it to the majesty. But I also know that now that we live in an incarnate faith, God walked with us and assumed our form of a servant, us. That it's important to also recognize that he bled for us, he hungered, he thirsted, he was tempted, but he, of course, unlike us, was without sin.
A couple of thoughts on the specific details that we see here. I think one thing that jumps out to me is the gold is speaking to the kingly nature of God. And it's pretty clear that gold had the same kind of connotation back then as it does for us now. If somebody's covered in bling and gold ornaments, then they're trying to convey their sort of status and power and pomp and circumstance. I think that's the same thing we see here, is that the place where God lives is the place of like overabundance of resources. And you know, if you've got a blinging place like this, then you're pretty powerful, because otherwise someone else would break in and steal everything. And then the other thing is all the images of plants and trees and so on, I think speaks to it being a living place and almost like a garden, which is probably a lot of symbolism about what the temple means in relation to both the Garden of Eden and then also the future, like we look forward to one day dwelling with God in eternity, and that will be an existence that's full of like life and the kind of blooming of flowers and the giving forth of fruit and so on is all like these two things. I think is symbolically kind of what's going on for me. That's what I take away from it.
Well,
Is
the palm trees, right? I think that this echoes very much the tabernacles in the desert, right? Like we transport, of course, God, our great deliverer, out of the desert. We see where the old priests would be outside of the Holy of Holies where the ark is kept, but of course you had bread and wine. But I mean, your fathers ate heavenly bread. And so, you're reminded. I mean, you see this also too within King David's Psaltery. I mean, everything, especially what is it, Psalm 77, 76, depending on your translation, bringing yourself, out of heaven, and your forefathers were not paying attention. They still strayed from his commandments, but God was merciful unto those who built a tabernacle. And I mean, what is God's house but a tabernacle? And for them, I think for the ancient Hebrews now delivered out of Egypt, why not would your temples be reminiscent of the desert and be reminded of God's mercy and deliverance? And I think that the palm trees, the open flowers, this oasis in the desert, I think that's what to me, that's what it would seem. But again, I'm not a pre-Christian Hebrew praising God. I don't know for sure.
But I think it's a challenge in a way to my Puritan aesthetic values, right? That the churches that I was saying I felt the most comfortable in were the plainest, emptiest, poorest looking locations. But actually what the Holy of Holies was about, and yes, you're right, it's a different context, and we can't necessarily just transplant one into the other. But just as a sort of passing comment, this is a place of abundance, like exuberant abundance. Like we come to a God who doesn't want us to live empty lives. Like he brings into our lives all of the good things. Every good gift comes from above. And the closer we get to God, the more full we should feel in our hearts, rather than, I think, the way religiosity is often perceived, at least today, which is that the world is full of excitement and adventure and abundance and stuff. And then you withdraw from that to meet God. And there's a place for that. There's a place for going up the mountain and fasting and so on. But that's not all that religious practice is. There's an element of drawing near to God in order to receive with joy, and that God wants us to be, co-heirs with Christ to something very full and big and impressive and powerful.
Can I just say I've also got visions of Luke arriving in heaven. It's the new heaven, new earth. The mansions, it's described as like jade floors and sapphire bricks. And Luke just gets the whitewash out and then just covers it all with white. And he's the only one living in this like little simple hut.
Everyone else is just wearing big necklaces and chains, and I'm there in my monk's habit, like a robe.
Exactly. He's in a cave. Where's Luke?
I'm
Luke
preparing everyone a room. Yeah. Behold, my master's house has many rooms. It's like themed hotel, so everybody gets a room to their exact specifications.
Thou hast done well, my good and faithful servant. Here is your whitewashed room closet, just for you.
Weren't the Pharisees accused of being whitewashed tombs?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what the actual implication of that was. I mean, tombs isn't good as a start. Yeah, the whitewashing was covering up the fact that they were tombs.
The bones, dead bones on the inside, and the whitewashed tombs on the outside. I think it's Matthew 23 if you want to look it up.
Yeah, beautiful on the outside, but full of bones and dead and everything unclean.
Yeah, so the whitewashing in that case was like a positive. You were making something look nicer by whitewashing it. Now, whether or not you are actually dead and bones inside is still significant, but I don't think the attack was on the tombs was the thing that Jesus was condemning, not the whitewashing, right?
Whitewash on the inside, whitewash on the outside. Luke says, that's
You should. That's my.
What did he mean by this?
He said, "You Pharisees have not whitewashed enough. You now whitewash your hearts, like a good Puritan."
Well, he does talk about the mug or a cup that way. I think where he's like, you only wash the outside of it, not the inside. You should have washed both the outside and the inside. So I guess that kind of makes sense.
I'm telling you, you're all going to be converted to Cromwell's. Everything Cromwell said was right. Well, perhaps I don't know about you guys, but I feel like we've reached a natural closing point for the stream. What do you think? We've kind of wandered around aesthetics and landed at the Holy of Holies, in a way. So it feels like we've kind of, in a way, we've reached the top of our mountain here. I don't know how much of the stream was really, was deeply meaningful. I think there was a lot
Covered
of just,
a little bit of everything.
Exploring personal taste and things, but it's like the sugar that helps the medicine go down or whatever. So any last thoughts or comments or plugs or
yes. What we've all seen the black background, Luke. What I'd like to see is the gold background. Can you program? When you get the backgrounds automatically, just pure gold everywhere. That'd be great.
I probably can, but it will take me a little bit of fiddling. It did occur to me. I was thinking about that as well. That the image I've kind of constructed here is extremely plain and unadorned, and is that an accident? Probably not, right? If I had different tastes, I wouldn't have ended up like this, just being consumed into a black void.
What does Phil's background say? Tiny socks.
Yeah.
He thinks it's Christmas.
Yeah. Every day is Christmas.
Do you get presents delivered in that sock every single night? You took that song, I Wish It Could Be Christmas Every Day, to heart. I will make it
a
true.
Lutheran thing? Lutherans get like micro Christmas every day, but the sock has to be really small. We have bigger socks. We get it once a year, but Lutherans get smaller socks, so they get presents every day.
Yeah, it's actually a
selling point.
Yeah, you guys should be Lutherans. No, I don't know what's keeping out the front door, but it's just a representation of disappointment, because I don't think that sock has ever been filled.
In some ways, isn't that the most Lutheran approach? There's a stark harshness to it. It's a reminder. It's like a memento mori. It's like a reminder of reality. The forever unfilled stocking.
Yeah, it's a visualization of this Luther quote. I think it was his dying words. Even we are beggars. This is true. So, ever open hands, ever open socks, heavenward held.
What? Ever open socks? Oh, Luke's trying to leave the gold.
Yeah.
I got almost there. Yes. I'm just bathing in a pool of money, like Scrooge McDuck. This is the nearest representation. Eat this, Americans. This is really what it was like to be inside the temple, blinded by gold everywhere you look. this kind of flickering appearance. This is for people who like Rococo. This is a simulation of what it's like for me to look at at the interiors you like. Just kind of annoying, buzzing flies circling. I should make it bigger, shouldn't I? So you can. Hang on. Oh no, wrong button. No. How do I zoom in on just me?
Okay.
Yes, there we go.
The best thing is your eyes have got the gold in the
Yeah.
people as well. So.
Whoa, that's crazy.
What's that Ozymandias quote?
Look upon my works, ye mighty in despair.
Yes, exactly. Good. Well, thank you very much for joining me, one and all. And yes, I suppose this is if none of you have any plugging to do, I will do a brief bit of plugging, but I'll just give you one more chance.
I'll just thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, Luke.
Oh well, it's always lovely. It's always lovely to interact with you in any way, Prudentialist, and I'm very honoured when you come on my stream. So thank you. I am working on Ascension still. I'm sorry it's taking longer than I originally sort of expected, but it is all in aid of quality. So go and look in the description. There's a new channel that I'm going to be putting that up on called Lambda Media. And the other thing is the weekend retreat is in just over a month, and there's still plenty of spaces. So you can come and join the Merry Gang on the 2nd to the 4th of August. And we're going to have an awesome time. I have started preparing my talks, and I'm very excited. I've got lots of awesome things to share with you all. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to, I already know a bunch of people are coming back. So I'm just really looking forward to getting the gang back together, seeing them all again. So, but yes, there's a link to a Google form to apply. It does cost money, but honestly, if you think money is going to put you off in any way, just message me and let me know, because, I'm much more interested in having you there than having your money. Like,
I mean,
if I end up
Luke's surrounded by gold right now, so that's not a
right.
problem.
Yes, if I have to pay for every single person who comes on the retreat, then I'll do it, and it will only be like one handful out of the ether of my giant clutch of coin. This is a fairly accurate representation of the life of a programmer, by the way. Like we just have shovel. So, like, my employer comes with 2 big bags of gold every morning and just like dumps them at my door.
Pours it down, exactly.
So subscribe to Lambda Media. Come join us on the retreat. And join us again for another exciting episode of Lambda Bible Studies anon.